Hello, everyone. Welcome back. I'm still in Chicago. This room still needs to be a bit more unpacked, but I am in the swing of things enough to do another stream. And today we are going to work on the starter adventure for Bastion of Hope, my forthcoming frame of Defiant Fantasy compatible with the Daggerheart rules. The Bastion PDF is on track for release soon, but I don't have a firm date for you just yet. And I have had some interest from folks on more material in Bastion, and there continues to be a lot of a demand for written adventures for the game. And while I am working on the Dungeons of Drakkenheim Daggerheart campaign guide, that is a thing that I'm working on for somebody else. It has its own production schedule. It's a big project with a lot of people involved. But I can work on things that are my own, and it's a nice break from the other work. It helps me kind of stay engaged and inspired, and I want to keep streaming because getting to stream and share my thoughts about Daggerheart and advice for it has been a great fun part of this last kind of stage of my game design career. So I wanted to keep on doing that with you all. Very quickly, some shout outs to Skis71 and Alfier for following the channel over the last week or so. Thanks also to Zephian for following a bit before that. We've been in Chicago for, I guess, 2 weeks as of today, but time feels, maybe it's 3 weeks. It must be 3 weeks as of today, but as you can tell, time is very for me right now because of all of this change and adjustment to the new stage of life, and that is all cool, but sometimes a bit disorienting. As a reminder, as you can see from the material down here, this video is not official content of Darrington Press or Critical Role. And in this video, I'm speaking only for myself, not for anybody else or any company. So we're going to be using the community gaming license to create Daggerheart compatible material. And with that said, nope, we're going to use this one. And then that is the thing that is going to get removed. And now we're off to the races. If you have read the text of the Bastion of Hope campaign frame, which you can do if you are a backer over at my Patreon at certain levels, you will have already gotten to see the write-up of the inciting incident, which has the player characters investigating what has gone on, what has happened at a place called Fort Shadowpeak, which is a fortress on the edge of Bastion's territory. Bastion being the one free country in this kind of continent, really in the world, but in this continent, which is the area that the campaign frame focuses on. Bastion has killed their draconic overlord, overthrown that power structure, and kind of banded together to create a free democratic republic. But since they are still surrounded by countries ruled by these tyrants, dragons, or necromancers, they are in a tough spot and they need allies. Bastion had made a tentative agreement to buy some magical artifacts from one of the countries that is very trade and shipping focused. And that was going to be delivered to the fort. So there's a few things going on, and we can talk a little bit about that when I get to this section. What I want to do today is talk very quickly through the official writing work that I've done and start to take the prep work that I did when I ran a playtest of Bastion into written adventure material to get the ball rolling. If you've been following this adventure writing series that this video is part of, you'll know that I started working on some material for Fort Shadowpeak itself, which is going to go toward the end of this adventure, but I decided it was a good idea to jump back to the beginning of this adventure and write forward from there. I'm going to be folding in some of the elements that I've talked about elsewhere and previously in this series, including the archetype system, which you can see here, and just kind of continuing to iterate on the adventure design approach that I've been utilizing in my creator-owned works, which is inspired by and building on the work that I did for Darrington on the Quick Start adventure and on the Marauders of Windfall adventure, which was the Gen Con adventure to play at the con during the open beta. Not this last year, but the year before that. So, all that said, let's go through what I've got. I did some noodling on a rough 5-act structure for the adventure where there's some breakpoints and we're just describing the shape of the adventure in a way that's similar to what adventure writing for the game has been like before. It's also a little bit of a way for me to organize my own thinking on this. And then we have some archetypes. This is using the archetype adventure design system that I previously described as made-to-measure design. And the idea here is that I want to create some open edges or raw edges in the adventure that are specifically like jigsaw pieces for the player characters to connect their characters to the adventure so that the adventure feels as much like it is specific to them as is possible for something that has been already written. And this is an approach that is supposed to help the GM and help the players so that everybody involved feels like the adventure is working with them in making the story of the campaign about the player characters, rather than here is the story of the adventure and you just happen to be in it, right? My personal preference for how I want Daggerheart adventures to work and the way that I write them to the best of my ability, especially in my creator-owned stuff when I'm kind of the final say, is that I want the material to be flexible and inviting, right? To have the space and make an effort to bring in the creativity and the contributions of the players and the GM so that any one group's experience of an adventure feels like it's about their player characters. The degree to which we can do this is going to vary based on player buy-in, based on the characters that are being created, and based on how good the archetypes are set up and how effective the prompts are that go along with these archetypes. If you look at Marauders of Windfall or the Quick Start Adventure, or if you've had the chance to play The Dying Spire, which is going to be, last I heard, released for Free RPG Day later this year by Darrington. There are prompts in each of those adventures that the GM is then encouraged to feed into and have inform elements of the fiction. So for our Bastion of Hope adventure, which I think is just going to be something or other, right? Something Fort Shadow Peak. I haven't actually gotten to the stage of like, what do I want this adventure's name to be? Because previously it was just the inciting incident for the frame. So coming down into archetypes specifically, I had some initial thoughts, right? With archetypes, I want to come up with a name or a title, and then there's a key element to this archetype, right? So archetype 1 is somebody that knew a person posted at Fort Shadow Peak, so that they can have somebody to be looking for or to reconnect with when the group gets to the fort. Here I'm going to state, just in case it's not already evident, that in the stream I'm going to talk about stuff throughout the adventure. So if you are expecting to or wanting to be a player of this adventure when it is released, you're going to get some spoilers here. If you are planning to run the adventure, there will be some delivery of information out of order. It's sort of spoilers and sort of not if you know that you're going to be the GM, but just be forewarned. Archetype number 2 is going to be somebody that knows the inverted forest region. As we can see farther down the page, Act 1 of this adventure is going to be called The Inverted Forest, and this is a section of the Bastion countryside that has a cool, weird fantasy thing going on, right? Inverted forest meaning that there's a chunk of air there's a chunk of ground floating in the air with trees that grow out pointing down, right? You take a chunk of earth, you flip it around, and then the trees hang down, and then there's magic stuff happening around there. This is something that I did in that playtest, and I want to continue to build on that. Somebody that knows the inverted forest region is then a character that the GM can go to with prompts while the group is playing through and investigating this region. So it gives that character a chance to show some mastery or some knowledge, right? This can be, but is not required to be, a ranger or a druid, right? The classes that are more traditionally associated with nature, right? They both have the sage domain or exist in the sage domain. Archetype number 3 is going to be a character that has contacts with criminals or smugglers in the nation of Five Roads, which is the shipping merchant country that Bastion has made this deal with. And then I want to have a 4th archetype. For most adventures, I think I want to have 4 character archetypes and then tell the GM you want player characters to fit at least 3 of them, and it's optimal if different characters occupy each of those 3 archetypes, right? If you had a party of 5 and one character is like, oh yeah, I want to be from the inverted forest region and know somebody at Fort Shadow Peak, that's 2 archetypes for 1 character. You might get 1 archetype each for 2 other characters, but then you only have 3 of 5 of your characters who are connected more directly to this adventure material through the archetypes. Whereas if you used all 4, then you're at 80% direct connection as opposed to 60%. In a smaller group, maybe it makes more sense or is less of a problem to have 1 character fill more than 1 archetype, right? If you have 3 PCs, but you want to hit all 4 archetypes, somebody is going to end up doubling up. But I don't have a specific example or a specific thought just yet about what I want that 4th archetype to be. What we can do, however, is start to name these archetypes, because that's going to be a lot easier to refer to in a way where we can just kind of follow what's going on, right? So this is going to be the comrade is archetype number 1. I haven't decided. Don't have a thought about number 2 yet. Number 3 is going to be the contact. Somebody that has connections, right? So connections, let's say. A syndicate rogue is a great candidate for the contact archetype, but they're not the only option. I'm not super in love with the fact that both of the named archetypes I have so far start with the letter C. It's my general practice in RPGs that I try to have characters' names start with different letters to make it easier to differentiate them. And so if I have contacts contact names or contact titles that use, or archetype names or titles that use the same first letter, right? Comrade and contact. It's just a little bit harder to differentiate, right? So this could be the friend, or this could be the squad mate, right? If I narrow down to you were in a squad with somebody who is posted at Fort Shadow Peak, the trick there is that that is asking the player character to go a little bit deeper in their buy-in. It's saying not just, I need a character who could know somebody who is posted at Fort Shadow Peak. It's also somebody who was a part of the formal or informal military of Bastion, or the revolutionary effort that led to the creation of this nation. Right? So there's a question of calibrating and finding how deep and narrow I want each of these archetypes to be, because that will inform and set different expectations of groups using the archetype system for this adventure. Right, I'm going to take a drink here. So I'm going to go to OBS and mute myself real quick. Hello, Disa. Very glad that you could make it to this live stream, and thanks for hanging out. Let me know if you have any questions as we go. Otherwise, please enjoy. All right, I'm just double checking that my audio came back on because I'm paranoid. Hello, NS Man. Thank you. That's very kind. So, with our archetypes, I could have a name. We could have a name for number 2. Right. So this is, it could be the local, but that is an archetype name that I feel like is going to end up getting used very frequently. I think I have an archetype named as the local in Voice of the Swarm, my Witherwild set adventure. So I don't know that I want to stick with that. I wouldn't call them the Ranger, because that is going to set expectations about what class the character is, and I don't want to limit it that much. All right, so that could be, this could be the Forester. This could also be like the Wayfinder, except I think Wayfinder is a subclass name for Ranger, right? So I'm going to put a little question mark here. And thank you, Disa Balcheron, for following the channel. I appreciate it. Okay. So the things we're going to do without archetypes. All right, so names for all 4 archetypes. Decide number 4. We're doing the wonderful word as being word again. And prompts for each the guide is really nice, NSman. I'm gonna pencil that in for now. I think it's a great option. What I want to do with archetypes, right? I need to decide what number 4 is, come up with names for each of them, and then I want to write starting prompts for each of these archetypes that will help that player kind of get the ball rolling to think about this connection to the material of the adventure. Right, so a starting prompt might be, squad mate, you once fought alongside, and then NPC, and then this prompt would be basically, you once fought alongside, and then I give the name. If the connection for the squad mate is to an NPC who is specifically established in the fiction, then I, as the designer, am doing more of the work up front, and I am creating a prompt that is more about an individual character's relationship to that NPC. Right? We might say that they're like wild-born Dracona with a sharp sense of humor. So I have the name, I have their heritage, and an evocative but concise description of the kind of person that they are. But that is setup. The thing I'm asking of the player is to add something here, right? To connect their character to this character. The starting prompt is going to be designed to create an emotional investment for that player character, because they are going to learn pretty much immediately, as we can see in this material, that they are being sent to Fort Shadowpeak and that something may have gone wrong there. If we have a character who I've just told, hey, you know somebody who now is posted at Fort Shadowpeak, that's going to create a hook, an emotional hook for that player character, and should be a way for that player to buy in to the scenario. I probably want this connection to be somewhere along the lines of, right, they saved you or you saved them. And then I'm going to do this setup. What I haven't decided is what all am I going to say what is the adventure going to say in terms of, this is the archetype and here's the information you need to know to decide if you want to buy into this. Because if the initial prompt is something along these lines, then that plus a prompt that is not about Shadowpeak but is about your relationship to that character should then give you enough that when you learn, hey, you're going to Shadowpeak and Bastion has lost touch with it, that should be enough material for the player to then put things together and decide how their character is feeling about this situation. If I don't have the specifics of Shadowpeak up here, then the prompt probably needs to include that, or I need to have a follow-up prompt in this introductory material. For the sake of saving space, I'm going to assume that we're leaving this prompt like this, just in terms of letting the player know the key element for this archetype. Right, so this would be, tell us about the time she saved your life, and then I want some other beat, right? And why you lost touch shortly after that day. I can have this prompt set up this way if it's clear in the archetype setup that this character is still around, right? If the prompt was, tell us about the time she saved your life and why you lost touch shortly after that day, and the answer was she died, then this is not as usable a emotional connection to the prompt. having an emotional investment in a character who has died is still investment, but the way this adventure is being written is that this character is, at least theoretically, still alive at the beginning of the adventure, as far as this player character, who is the squad mate, knows. Hello, Lord Soulwolf. I dig these wings. It's like the wings and then like a hamster in the middle. KFDMIT wiggle. Good emote. So we're going to do this. And then this is going to be like, I don't know, header 3 or something in here. So it's going to be guide, contact, number 4, right? There's a prompt for each of these. Right, what's the strangest animal you've seen that adapted to the flipped gravity of the inverted spire? So this is a prompt that would give the GM an animal, possibly a threat or just something to encounter while the group is traveling through the inverted spire. Right? This could be a prompt about an animal, or what is the most dangerous part of the inverted spire? What is the most beautiful part of the inverted spire? Inverted forest. I got spire in my brain because of the Dying Spire adventure. Right, so strangest animal in the inverted forest. Similarly to number 1, I might want to either have a little bit more explanation of what the inverted forest is, or right? Do I need to explain even just like a 1-sentence explanation of the inverted forest in the introductory material? Because if I don't give enough specifics, the prompt could be too broad for a player just coming to the adventure without having read anything about it. And or because the forest region is not as firmly decided, the player might improvise or create something that is a cool idea and definitely doesn't line up with the material that's written in the adventure itself. And we don't want to solicit ideas only to immediately shoot them down. As much as possible, we want to, in my opinion, pre-frame with our prompts so that the player has all of the bounding and like limitations that they need so that they can come up with something wild and cool within that, and it won't be a problem for the GM to integrate into the adventure itself. So a strange animal is probably going to be easier to work in than what is the most dangerous part of the inverted forest, because that is a bit broader, and someone could say, oh, well, the most dangerous part is the world fern, which is this, or the world fir, this really big fir tree that has grown so much that it's bored down into the ground and has become the axis along which the inverted forest hangs. It's like, okay, that's really cool. That's a pretty big element for the inverted forest that the GM might then have to do a little bit of scrambling to reorganize the material in the adventure so that it will fit this cool idea. That said, different GMs and different tables with different play styles are going to find this adventure, and different people are going to use it more or less loosely or more or less just according to how it is written. And so sometimes prompts that could, with a really fun and weird answer, blow up or require some reworking may be fine for some groups. What I think I'm going to do to start is try to find prompts that constrain and focus the creative contributions from the players, at least at the very beginning of the adventure. It may be a bit easier to give prompts that are more open or broad later on in the adventure, because if things get wild later on, there's less written material that the GM has to make those answers fit in order to keep the story moving forward and cohesive, right? If you go off script later in the adventure's structure, you're not having to readjust as much material, right? You're going, oh, okay, well, Act 5 goes to here, and we've actually gone here, and that's fine. Whereas if Act 2 is here, and by Act 2 of the adventure, you're already over here, you're just, as you can see in my camera, you're kind of not even on the same page anymore. So we're going to stick with an animal. And then what's pardon me. So, for another prompt, right, for the contact, you know of an abandoned settlement used by smugglers from 5 roads. What is its name? And why was it abandoned? Abandoned. So that's 3 prompts that we have already. It's hard to do a prompt for the 4th archetype because I haven't decided what that archetype is going to be. So I think we're just going to leave it here. Yeah, let me tweak this a bit. I'm also just a little bit off-center / the camera is a little off-center. So we're going to move this here. And we're going to adjust this. I don't know why that got messed up here. We're going to move this even just a little bit more. Okay, that's better. Thank you, NSMen. Okay. Right, so these prompts are, you're going to give the prompts to those players when you're basically doing setup. If I was following the structure of the Quick Start Adventure directly, I would put these on the page with the kind of overview of the pre-gen character. I haven't decided whether I want to do pre-gen characters for this adventure yet. it would be a quality of life boon. A lot of people won't use pre-gen characters because people want to make their own characters. Pre-gen characters would have the advantage that I could just decide which pre-gen character fits which archetype and then use that to guide some of the prompts. But I also like the flexibility that the archetype system gives. If I used pre-gens, I would just pick which pre-gen was which archetype, and I would continue to hail the character by that archetype and have a reminder that says, remind each player that their character fits one of these archetypes. Right? And so it would be squad mate, and then I would probably put in parentheses, at least the first time there was a prompt for each archetype, squad mate, and parentheses, Doran, if the pre-gen character who was the squad mate was named Doran. Something that I've learned in adventure writing is that the more you can do to streamline and smooth out the flow of information at the very beginning of the adventure, the easier time you're going to have, because you're reducing the chances of somebody missing a key detail that other material later on will build on. If you drop a detail into an early part of an adventure and don't emphasize it, and then it turns out to be really important later on, and it's just mentioned once and then becomes a big deal later on, it may be that that detail doesn't get established really firmly in the beginning, and then it's harder to get that payoff, for the payoff or the reincorporation to be as effective. And similarly, when introducing a new design system or a new kind of design framework, like the archetype system, or more broadly, people who are new to Daggerheart and new to kind of narrative-focused games, they may be new to this idea of more consistent or systematic player prompting, where the player is being solicited to add directly to the world of the narrative and not just share and narrate their own character's actions. So, me repeating this here is also repeating it for myself as a reminder. So, there we go. Now I'm going to scroll down until we have, I can see the text for our introduction. All right, we're going to go back just a little bit. Reading here. Some of this is going to be kind of introductory text, and then some of it is going to be more like boxed text as the letter from a quest giver character. Oh yeah, the text is still not great here. I wanted to make the text bigger so it was easier to see, but then that also makes it harder to fit everything onto the page. Okay, going back here. Hopefully that is better so you can see everything that's there. The other thing I could do is I could just increase the font size of everything in this Word doc, because I'm switching over to using Word instead of Google Docs for my stream presentations, because I just want to keep stuff in Word for my own purposes. So I'm just going to read some of this out loud. At the edge of Bastion's territory, the small fortress on the foothills of Shadow Peak, the mountain at the edge of the mountain, here, reading this out loud means that I'm catching things that are like typos, or I'm able to correct my flow. Okay. At the edge of Bastion's territory lies Fort Shadow Peak, a small castle in the foothills of Shadow Peak, the mountain at the far eastern edge of the 5 peaks. This is still a little repeaty because the mountain is Shadow Peak. I will streamline later in editing. The fort had been complaining of undead attacks, so Bastion leadership has dispatched your party, a group of newly chosen chainbreakers, to investigate the situation. Now, I was trying to do some streamlining earlier, and it dropped in a detail, and has not reported in for several days. Therefore, Bastion leadership has dispatched your party, M-, because we're putting in some information, right? We're filling in that your party, who are newly chosen chainbreakers, to investigate the situation. Fort Shadow Peak is not only important to Bastion's defense as the stronghold protecting the northeasternmost border, it is also the nexus through which lumber and medicine was shipped to the laboratory, one of these other nations, and where the oath-bonded couriers of 5 roads would deliver their packages on behalf of nations across the region. Hello, it's Nico de Gallo! If folks have not seen, and I've talked about this a little bit, I had the chance to play in a actual play with Nico over on their YouTube channel, GM'd by Azu. This was a kind of pirate, nautical-themed adventure, and I had a great deal of fun. You can go and check it out over on that channel if you want a sense of what I am like as a player in Daggerheart rather than when I am just GMing. It's also fun for me to get to experience how other people run the game, because so much of my experience with Daggerheart is when I'm GMing. Additionally, you should check out the Daggerheart to Heart podcast that Nico does with Gethin, aka the Welsh DM. So, some more context here for the adventure. Bastion has been attempting to normalize trade relations with the 5 roads to be able to pay for imports secondhand using the trade nation as an agent, right? Anybody will trade with 5 roads, and then 5 roads will sell stuff to Bastion. That's what they want. Barakes, the 5 roads ruler, is known to be more loyal to coin than kin, but if Bastion cannot guarantee safety for the couriers, the flagellation of Bastion will be entirely cut off from the region's economy. Right? This is context. Why is this important? It's not just go and check on this fort. It is, here's what this fort means to the country. Here's what's going on. And here's why failing at this mission could be a big problem for you. I also see that the Dice Rolleth has followed the channel. That is the name of the actual play show. So if you want to go and check out the show directly, that's the Dice Rolleth, which is also a great, it's a great catchphrase, right? You say the name of the show is a good thing. It's a good bit to do. This last bit is more into brass tacks specifics, right? Fort Shadow Peak is a 1.5-day ride from Choray's Stand, which is the capital. And the couriers are due in 2 days at dawn. So it will take you almost the whole time to get there that you have before the couriers are arriving. So you have to rush. You'll need to race through dangerous forest, break any siege or oust occupying forces, relieve whatever troops remain, and ensure that Barakas's couriers are well received without arousing suspicions. So you need to not just get there, figure out what's going on, do something about it, and then go through or succeed in this kind of social engagement. having played and run a lot of Blades in the Dark, my brain goes, well, yeah, it's a social engagement, right? It's a social mission. You're going to go and investigate this thing, and then you have to go and do a social thing, right? These are all terms that are used more broadly than just in one game, but they have a strong association. And then this bit is the most diegetic part of this setup, because I'm going to need to take all of this material and decide how to present it, right? What if this is in box text where the GM is being encouraged to read it out directly versus what is material for the GM to then convey to the players as they see fit, right? You can read box text to yourself and then paraphrase it as much as you want. And in an adventure write-up, I will often say, read or paraphrase this for your party, so that they don't necessarily have to read it exactly as you've written it, because some people just like to paraphrase anyway, right? They want to shorten it or just use their own words. So your orders. Determine why communication has ceased. Regain control of Fort Shadow Peak as necessary. Ensure the safe arrival of the couriers and that they are paid. Send word back to the capital and hold your position for reinforcements, right? So you have to do 4 things, more or less in that order. I have largely been replacing vel X, vel Y in my writings about Bastion with the kind of in English phrase, name, right? So Vel Sivar is the Red Towers. Vel Barakes is the 5 Roads. Vel Frazek is the Laboratory. It's cool to have fantasy names, but the more fantasy names a setting has, the higher kind of a barrier to entry there can be when somebody is just kind of reading an overview. They're like, okay, there's 3 different names and they all start with the same thing. What's going on? I know that the fact that these each start with Vel is because in Draconic, Vel is place/home of, right? Vel, it's the place where this person's in charge, place where this person's in charge, place where that person's in charge, right? These 3 dragon-held regions. But somebody who's just coming to Bastion of Hope without knowing anything about the setting is going to see several different fantasy names. And that may be a little bit harder to grab a hold of or to process and hold in their minds in terms of like short-term memory than becoming long-term memory. Plus, I think that the names are kind of cool. The Red Towers, the Laboratory, 5 Roads, right? These are meant to be evocative on their own. So they may be more effective as a way of building engagement with the setting than having those specific fantasy names. The names are still there, right? They're in the material and they're in the world, but I'm foregrounding the English version. Okay. And if we scroll down a little bit more, I have a write-up for the Chainbreaker mission or quest giver character. Right now, I have elected to have the player characters start once they have already received the mission. Right, they're on the road. We're beginning in medias res, in the middle of things, following the design and the GM principle / best practice in Daggerheart of cut to the action. There are absolutely groups that will want to play out the discussion with the quest giver. And so I have not yet decided for sure whether I want to fully skip that step in this adventure write-up. When I ran the adventure, we played out this conversation. I had a good time playing that NPC, Eckerd. And there may be groups who are less comfortable with the en medias res start. There are a few different ways of doing this, right? I can give the information without saying act 1, scene 1, you get the mission. This information as presented is enough, probably, for most GMs to say, hey, so this adventure starts when you're already on the road. Do you all want to do the scene where you get the mission? And then if the players say yes, take this material and go, okay, so here's how we do this. If I was going to have Act 1, Scene 1 be you get the mission, I would provide a little bit more context for here is the place where Eckerd meets you or where Eckerd has you come so that they can give you the mission. Here we have additional prompts. These prompts are not framed or pointed to any of the archetypes. They are instead more of a free-for-all that the GM can direct to anybody in the group or to the group entirely. Right? If I ask the group, why is Eckerd annoying to work with? That reduces the pressure or the heat of the spotlight on any one individual player, and it lets people who don't want to take the spotlight kind of stay in the background. What it doesn't do is provoke immediate response, because if I throw a prompt out to the group, we can have that moment where everybody just waits for somebody else to jump in. How much I use prompts to the group versus prompts that are framed to an individual player or to character is something that I modulate based on the group, the type of prompt, how well I know that group, and what I'm trying to do in the given scene, right? If I know that somebody has been in the background, I might frame a prompt to them to try to give them an opportunity to metaphorically step forward, right? To take some spotlight, make a contribution, and kind of either get involved or re-engage with the adventure or with the session. Below this, I just have the material from the last stream, right? For Shadow Peak itself. So there's a lot of in between that I don't have. So what we're going to do is we're going to go, this is going to be, Act 1 is the inverted forest, and then Act 1, Part 1. This setup stuff might end up being Act 1, Part 1, but who knows? We're at just about an hour. I want to go a little bit farther here and do a bit of writing, both so that I can make myself do this writing and to be able to give a little bit more specific, some more specific examples within the stream rather than just reviewing what I've already done, which is what most of the stream has been so far. So this is going to have a key environment, traversal. This is something that has been said in a Darrington Press Get Your Sheet Together video, so I'm not like I'm just building on what's already there. Sometimes an environment can have more than one type, right? So we could have a exploration and traversal environment. The inverted forest could be an environment set up both to provide an interesting place for the player characters to explore and present challenges related to traversal. I can probably do both of those things with one environment stat block, especially because I'm writing a stat block for a specific adventure and a specific use case in a scene or a sequence for that adventure. A lot of the environments written in the core rulebook or in other things that I've published or contributed to the environments are meant to be fairly broad or generic in their use, right? They're meant to be able to support a bunch of different options, versus a inverted forest environment is very much built for a specific use case, even though you could go, well, I like this. This is cool. I'm going to take this and put an inverted forest in my world somewhere, right? There's still that portability, but I am starting from a specific use case, and then I'm designing it for this adventure and hoping that it has cool enough and more broadly usable enough ideas that someone will go, well, I'm going to take this inverted forest environment from Mike's adventure and I'm going to plop it in this other thing where I'm not playing in Bastion of Hope. Though I hope many of you will run or play in a Bastion of Hope campaign once the frame is out there. I know that at least one of my Patreon subscribers has been running a game in Bastion of Hope. So you can join that cool company of people using this setting that I think is great. Right, and then this is going to be heading 4. Yeah, something like that. Now, heading 4 is looks a little smaller than this, but that's fine. I'm not going to be the person who's doing final layout on this because I am not good enough at layout to feel like I want to make it for my professional work. The only time when I do layout for things is when I'm making the very basic text PDF to share with patrons. But the environment is not going to be the entirety of this section. And I just want no styles. Just let me do the thing. Okay. So what I want to do here is give players some agency right away while still getting to deploy and use this environment that I'm going to be creating, right? Because if I make an environment and then I write an adventure where the players can just completely ignore that environment, I've not done myself a favor. I have done myself a disservice by saying, I did a bunch of work over here. But what if you just ignored it? I don't want the group to just ignore it. This is part of an ongoing process that individual designers are going to have to figure out for themselves in terms of adventure writing for Daggerheart. This is applicable for almost any game, but because Daggerheart, as I run and play it, is a game that encourages the party to kind of push the story forward themselves, for the players to take some authorship over the narrative, and for the GM to improvise a fair amount, right? Not all the way, not 100% improvisation, because this is a module, but more improvisation than a play style where you have the module and you are just only ever thinking about the possibilities that exist within what is already written. For me, I want to present adventures that are a great skeleton or framework that is adjustable and mutable and flexible enough that a given GM and party can do a bunch of different things with it, so that they can make it their own and enjoy it and be able to have fun with it, even if they kind of take some things in different directions. So what we're going to do is right. So the idea here is, let me scroll down so that this prompt is visible. Right, and this is a prompt for the forester character. What shortcut through the inverted forest could you take that's even more dangerous, but would shave off several hours of your journey? And why is it so dangerous, or why is it usually avoided? Right, I've already said that it's dangerous, so I want every word or every bit of what I'm writing to be additive. There's going to be some repetition, but I try to repeat in a way that is not necessarily always the exact same thing said again and again. And thank you, Nico, for following the channel. If folks don't know Nico DeGaio's work, they do a bunch of YouTube short form advice. So I do a lot of longer form advice. Nico does some short form advice, as well as other things that they've added. But if you don't remember Nico from the videos that we've done together, and you want to have, you want some more bite-sized Daggerheart in your life, there you go. So we got this prompt. Based on, why is everything italicsed? The answer, present the facilitate discussion for the party exploring their different options in getting to the fort. The shortcut will save time, but present additional dangers, and taking the long way around the inverted forest will all but guarantee the PCs arrive after the couriers from 5 roads. So I'm presenting 3 options here. Take the normal route through the inverted forest, take the shortcut with an extra danger, or go around the inverted forest, but you won't make it there in time. The danger of option 3 from the designer standpoint is option 3 is not going to have much, if any, support material within the adventure, because Act 1 is called the Inverted Forest. What I could do is reframe option number 3 again, a bit more harshly, or create a harder frame. And I could say, taking the long way around the Fortis will guarantee that your party arrives after the couriers, endangering, leaving them this is the harder frame, right? The shortcut will save time but present additional dangers, option 1. Taking the long way around the inverted forest is not an option, as it would guarantee that your party arrives after the couriers from the 5 roads. What that says is that there's basically 2 options. Take the normal route through the inverted forest or take the shortcut. This still does give choice, but instead of establishing 3 options, normal route, fast route, slow route, which would require more material, right? Written material to support each of those 3 options. Instead, what this text is suggesting is that there's really 2 options. The written material for this act is going to mostly talk about the standard option, and then GM support for running the shortcut scene obstacle. Because the way I want to do this, and the way that I did it in the playtest, is we're going to have racing countdowns. If you are familiar with Blades in the Dark, you'll know the idea of racing clocks. Racing countdowns are established in the Daggerheart core rulebook. This is when we have a progress countdown representing the thing you're trying to accomplish, and a consequence countdown representing some bad thing happening that you're trying to basically accomplish. You're trying to do something before the bad thing happens. In this case, in this situation, it would be progress countdown, making my way to Fort Shadow Peak. The consequence countdown is the couriers arrive. If you don't get to Shadow Peak before the couriers arrive, you won't be there to pay them. And if you don't know what's happened at Shadow Peak, you could risk failing an essential part of this mission that you got from the Chainbreaker, right? It wasn't just figure out what happened, but ensure that the couriers are received, paid, and that you get the thing they're here to deliver. Now, if we're allowing the possibility that the consequence countdown could trigger first, we're probably going to need some written material supporting what happens if the couriers get there before the PCs. Because the story should move forward even if the PCs are not successful at some part of the mission. They may be able to salvage some part of the mission depending on how we do our setup for later elements of the adventure. I'm going to go into some more specific spoilers here, right? If the couriers arrive before the PCs, there's the question, do they just leave? And if so, do they take the delivery with them? There's the question of, there's the possibility that they arrive and are captured by the undead forces that are occupying Fort Shadow Peak, at which point the PCs could arrive, save the couriers, and then try to salvage the trade relationship element. If the couriers are killed by the necromantic forces, that is almost certainly a problem, but the player characters might still be able to salvage the goods and then report back to the Chainbreakers saying, hey, this thing happened, and then Bastion is going to need to try to smooth over the social element of dealing with the fact that the couriers were killed. Several different results could all still lead to a campaign that moves forward. And it's good to have that flexibility. There's going to be some constraints on this adventure based on how much word count I want to put into it. The longer the adventure is text-wise, the more different eventualities I can account for as the designer. But if some of these variations and eventualities are things that happen that basically correspond with Act 5 or maybe Act 4 of the adventure. It's easier for the text that I provide for those eventualities to be a little bit shorter and to leave the GM to figure it out for themselves. I probably want to have at least some material for what happens if the couriers arrive before the PCs, because I've established it as a possibility from the beginning or from an earlier part of this adventure. What I'm going to want to do at some point in this process is basically make myself a ponds and streams flowchart. Shout out to the Welsh DM for giving me that term, introducing me to the term, right? Where there's going to be decision points or branching points. Act 1, the players make their way to Fort Shadow Peak. Do they take a shortcut or not? They take a shortcut, they don't take a shortcut. And then from there, there's the question, do they arrive at Shadow Peak before the couriers? Yes, they arrive before. No, they don't arrive before. And then the third option is they arrive at the same time. And that would be if the progress countdown and the consequence countdown trigger at the same time. And what that would look like is the progress and consequence countdowns both get advanced to 1 each. And then the next roll that is counted for the clocks is a success with fear, because on a success with fear in this racing clock structure, each clock advances by 1, and so both countdowns would trigger. The party would arrive, and then the couriers would arrive. That creates an opportunity for the PCs and the couriers to connect and have a social scene there, and then figure out what to do about the fort itself. Here I'm thinking about what is talked about in interactive fiction design as diamond design, where you start with the party is going to be in this situation, and then there's possibilities. So we spread out, forming kind of a triangle, but then those possibilities are supposed to condense or coalesce back into a status quo that you can advance forward from, where you open up possibility and then you come back together, forming a diamond, or right? It's a smooshed rectangle. If you don't coalesce back into a single point, the structure of your adventure just continues spreading out like a web, and the broader that structure goes, the more different segments of text or structure you're going to need or are probably going to want to provide. And any given party's experience of the adventure only goes along this axis, right? They don't play out the 3 different options. They play the option that they chose. And so the broader your adventure material is, the shallower it's going to be, unless you then add word count, right? If I have 10,000 words, the broader I go, the shallower it's going to be. And taking another drink here. Pardon me. So that's some stuff on diamond design, just real quick. An important thing to decide here is how difficult is it going to be to make it to Shadow Peak before the couriers. In most of the examples that I have seen, a party, or the progress countdown starts with a larger value than the consequence countdown. That creates urgency. But if the consequence countdown starts at a number that's small enough, all it will take is one bad roll to more or less guarantee the bad result. Right? So let's math it out some. So if the progress countdown is 8 and the consequence countdown is 4, then the GM asks for the first roll representing kind of overcoming the first obstacle in the inverted forest. And they just straight up roll a failure with fear. A failure with fear calls to reduce a consequence countdown by 3. If the players then roll anything worse than a success with hope, the consequence countdown triggers. Because a success with fear advances a consequence countdown by 1. The last time I did a racing countdown in Daggerheart, the results were success with fear, success with fear, success with fear, critical. So, right, it was just ticking down both countdowns, and then they got a crit and completed the progress countdown, or just about completed it. And it was very funny because it seemed like they were advancing toward disaster and then pulled it out in the end. Along the way, the countdown maybe wasn't as satisfying as executed, but it worked out just fine. The thing I'm going to try to set up here is for a racing countdown at the beginning of an adventure, how much pressure do I want the adventure to put on the PCs, and how much grace or latitude am I going to allow for if the dice don't go the player character's way, right? An 8 and 4 is pretty punishing, as I showed with my math. If it's an 8 and 6, then it takes 2 failures with fear with no successes at all to have the consequence countdown hit 0 with the progress countdown making no progress. With an 8 and 6, we could have success with hope, we count to 6 and 6. Success with fear, 5 and 5. Failure with fear, 5 and 2. Success with hope, 3 and 2. Success with fear, 1 and 1. Success with hope, 0 and 1. So an 8 and 6 means that there's going to be minimum 2, right? The slowest it could go, the fastest it could go is 2 failures with fear triggers the consequence countdown. The fastest it could go with a success is 3 rolls if the players get 2 criticals and then a success with hope, or 3 criticals. Junkrat has a question. How do you decide the word count for a given project? When I am writing for myself, I go a bit more on gut and instinct. For a lot of the adventures I've been writing, I've basically benchmarked based on, do I want this to be about as long as one of the adventures published by Darrington? Do I want it to be longer? Do I want it to be shorter? When I'm writing for somebody else, they often have a word count in mind, and then I try to figure out how to scope the material and the level of detail to the word count that is being provided, right? Because if the budget is 10,000 words and I write 12,000 words, there's a chance I'm not getting paid for those other 2,000 words because I was given a budget. And if I go over it, then that's kind of on me. Now, how much flexibility there is depends on the company and the project. For this project and for myself, I'm probably shooting for somewhere in the territory of about 10,000 words. But I am probably mostly just going to write my way through the adventure in a form where I know I'm underwriting, see where that leads me in terms of my word count, and then decide where I want to fill things out as I'm deciding my priorities and approach for revision. So I think we're going to have this countdown be an 8 and 6, which requires 3 to probably 6 obstacles beats for the sequence, right? shortcut makes it a progress 6, but the obstacle is higher difficulty. Right? So if the party takes the shortcut option, instead of a environment difficulty of 12, that obstacle might be an environment difficulty of 15, where we're still applying this result to the progress and consequence countdowns, but the chances of failure are higher because it's a higher difficulty. So when I'm writing this inverted forest sequence, right, this act 1, I have a few ways of calibrating difficulty. The relative lengths of my progress countdowns in this racing countdown system, the difficulty of the inverted forest environment, the difficulty modifier for the shortcut option, and then there's things like the difficulty of potential adversaries, how much fear the GM is going to spend along the way, and some stuff like that, right? A GM, in a lot of circumstances, could, over the course of play, see a fictional opportunity or a fictional position to spend fear and reduce the consequence countdown by, oh, I'm going to spend this fear and there's a landslide. And that's going to delay you, so I'm going to advance the consequence countdown. That is another way of increasing difficulty and increasing the pressure on the party and the players. I probably want guidance on how much, when to spend fear to advance the consequence countdown. Right. And so the note that I've written to myself is they probably don't want to advance the countdown using fear by more than 1 or 2 unless the party really wants this to be a desperate scramble. If I were not streaming, one of the things that I would do is I would do some mental math on the types of combinations of roles that a party could have in addressing this pair of countdowns to gut check what those possibilities are versus what I think I want the experience of playing through this sequence to be. If the countdown were instead 4 progress, 3 consequence, that would play out much more quickly because, again, with a consequence countdown that starts at 3, that could trigger after 1 bad roll, a failure with fear. It could also trigger after as few as 2 good rolls if they're both successes with hope, or there's a success with hope and a critical, or a critical and a success with fear. Because a critical success advances by 3, and a success with fear advances progress and consequence by 1. A 4 and 3 roll could take as many as 3 rolls to finish, right? If you get success with fear each time, that triggers consequence. Or if you get success with fear, and then success with hope or critical, then progress triggers first. An 8 and 6 can have a few more rolls and there's more permutations. So the work that I need to do for the rest of this Act 1, either Act 1 Part 1 or Act 1 in general, right? Because Part 2 might be the obstacle, or it's Part 1 obstacle version, non-obstacle version, and then Part 2 would be deciding your resolution, right? Did you make it there before, same time, or after? If we look back here, I have Act 2 listed as opportunists, who are poachers. the idea with that was that it would be another obstacle on the journey to Fort Shadow Peak. I don't know that that necessarily fits the structure that I've built since then in focusing on this countdown. I could have a countdown that's just about this act, where basically you progress the countdown and then you check at the end of Act 1, and that sets your new status quo. And then that status quo informs elements of Act 2, and there's another countdown. And then the result of that determines whether you arrive before, at the same time, or after the couriers. So that's something I'm going to need to figure out. Whether I drop the opportunists beat, whether I fold it into Act 1, or whether I have this kind of multiple staged race element where, okay, I reframe what these countdowns mean, and then the results of that inform your starting situation when you engage or when you interact with the poachers. And then how you deal with that informs whether you arrive early, late, or at the same time as the couriers. But we are now an hour and a half in, which is the target that I gave myself. I have some other things to do today. It's pretty nice out, so I think it's going to be time to go and take a walk. I am going to keep working on this, and you'll be able to read work in progress drafts over at my Patreon. And I'm hoping in the next week or so to have a firm date for you for Bastion of Hope. It might not happen, but I'm keeping my fingers crossed that it will. And when I have that date, I will also then be able to talk about other promotional things that I'm doing there. I will have a date for people who are interested in having me on their show to talk about Bastion of Hope and make plans for that kind of stuff. And I will be able to start preparing the materials to go up onto the retailers. As a reminder, especially if you were not already a patron when Menagerie of Mayhem #1 came out, if you are a patron at $10 USD or up per month, you will get the PDF of all of my Daggerheart self-published books before anybody on retailers can, right? Patrons get the PDF first, and then it goes up on retailers around 1 to 2 weeks later. I'd rather have 2 to give more of an exclusive window, but sometimes things happen, right? I want to target the end of this month for release. If I can make that happen, I'm going to try to, but I want to give that exclusive window because that's part of what I've been promising with the Patreon. So that's what you're going to get. You can already get the full text version of the Bastion of Hope campaign frame by being a paid subscriber over on that Patreon. And if you have not already gone to check it out and are interested in a book of Daggerheart compatible adversaries from someone who knows Daggerheart compatible design very well, this one right here, that's me, you can check out Menagerie of Mayhem over at DriveThruRPG, itch.io, and at Heart of Daggers. That is going to be all for me today. Thank you to Junk Rabbit, It's Nico DeGaio, N. Esman, Lord Soul Wolf, Disa Balcheron, Adventure Lies Ahead 1, and everybody else who is here watching live. And thanks to the folks who were chatting. And thank you to anyone who is checking this out later on Twitch VOD or over at YouTube. I will see you all later on. Let me tab over. Here we go. Where's my ending? Okay, here we are.